A black father loses his 10-year-old daughter under mysterious circumstances. Unwilling to trust the official story, he takes a desperate step and installs a hidden camera inside her coffin. However, what he sees on that recording will shake him to his core and alter his life forever. Subscribe to this channel and write in the comments to let everyone know where you are watching from. The sun was bright overhead, casting warm light across the neat suburban street where Marcus Johnson lived with his daughter Leah. Their single-story home, trimmed with a white railing, sat in a row of similar houses. No matter how ordinary it appeared, it always felt special to Marcus because Leah was there. She was the one who filled their home with laughter and color, especially after her mother walked out of their lives years earlier. From that moment on, Leah was Marcus's reason to keep breathing. That morning had begun like countless others. Leah perched at the kitchen table, her small fingers deftly handling colored pencils as she sketched. Her current project showed a father and daughter standing beneath a large tree. Marcus, wearing a grease-stained t-shirt from his work at the local auto shop, flipped sausages and scrambled eggs. He peered over his shoulder when he heard her giggle. The warmth of that sound made any day feel brighter. "Make sure you get my muscles right," he teased, humor dancing in his eyes as he flexed a bicep. Leah lifted the half-finished portrait, adding exaggerated bulges to his arms with her pencil. "You're the strongest dad in the world," she declared, the kind of statement that sent a wave of pride through him every time. Marcus set a plate before her with a flourish. "Don't you ever forget it," he replied, leaning down to kiss the top of her head. It was a subtle, everyday moment, a father's adoration and a child's uncontainable joy. He had no idea this would be the last time he heard her laughter. By late afternoon, the neighborhood playground buzzed with children's laughter. Leah had begged and pleaded for permission to play outside, and although Marcus hesitated, he worried about letting her out of his sight. Her happiness won him over. He settled at the living room table to finish filling out invoices for the auto shop, but his attention drifted every few minutes. He checked the time obsessively, an ache of unease tugging at him. When the phone eventually rang, he answered, dread already twisting in his chest. "Sir, we need you to come to Memorial Hospital immediately." "It's about your daughter," said a calm yet starkly professional voice. Marcus could barely recall the drive that followed. Waves of panic and a surreal sense of detachment numbed him. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. His pulse hammered as he dashed through corridors. Finally, a doctor in rumpled scrubs approached, her face set in a solemn expression. "We did everything we could," she said softly. Leah was gone. The official report insisted Leah had suffered a fatal fall from the jungle gym, but every fiber in Marcus's body screamed that the story felt incomplete. While the details blurred around him, the swirl of hospital staff, the buzz of fluorescent lights, he realized his entire world had shattered in an instant. Arrangements for Lee's funeral were handled with startling speed. The neighbors offered hushed condolences, but few truly knew Leah. They offered those polite smiles Marcus had seen 1,000 times, surface-level kindness that never penetrated his grief. The small white coffin, lined with delicate gold trim, looked heartbreakingly out of place set among rows of granite headstones. At the wake, Marcus stood beside his sister, Clara, who had flown in from Atlanta. Lee's skin had an artificial pallor from the mortician's makeup, and as he gazed at her tiny form, he noticed something the mortician hadn't mentioned: bruises on her arms and legs. The autopsy report had overlooked those details, and that fact lodged in Marcus's mind like a splinter. He recalled how the paramedics at the scene seemed evasive when answering his questions. Their reluctant muttering and the fact that none of them would meet his eyes only deepened his suspicion. Could so many unexplained marks be the result of a simple playground accident? As he struggled to process this, he overheard two funeral home workers talking quietly about how they shouldn't waste time on people like them. The sharpness of their words stung. Marcus knew the subtext. People like them, black families who were expected to accept whatever narrative was handed to them without question, whose concerns were often brushed aside. Then, as Marcus leaned over Leah in her coffin for a final goodbye, he noticed another unnerving detail: dirt lodged beneath her fingernails. He was positive it hadn't been there before. His heart pounded. "Why would there be dirt under her nails?" he whispered shakily to Clara. She urged him to let it go, to grieve in peace. But Marcus couldn't. The puzzle pieces, the unexplained bruises, the half-hidden conversations, and now dirt under her nails, refused to let him rest. That very night, Marcus barely slept. He lay in bed, staring at a dark ceiling, his mind a storm of questions. By early morning, he had a plan. At a nearby electronics store, he purchased a compact hidden camera. The cashier gave him a curious glance, but Marcus said nothing. He came back home, carefully pried open the lining of Lee's coffin, and planted the camera. Inside, pointing at what was once his daughter's final resting place. His stomach churned with guilt as he did it. Yet something gnawed at him to take this drastic measure, a voice that insisted he could not allow her death to be brushed aside. When Clara arrived later, he revealed his desperate act. Her shocked reaction didn't deter him. "Clara, I'm not letting this go," he told her, his eyes red from sleeplessness. "I have to know the truth. You saw the bruises. You saw the dirt. No one can explain it. If I'm wrong, so be it. But if I'm right," his voice wavered. Clara took a trembling breath. "I worry for you," she admitted, her concern evident. "But I can see how much this matters. Just promise me you'll be careful." He nodded, hooking the camera feed into his computer to watch in real time. For hours, the screen showed only the dark interior of the coffin. It looked exactly how one would expect, a sealed space with no movement, no noise. Marcus's own thoughts began to grate on him. "This is insane. You're losing it." But around midnight, the feed flickered. He leaned in, eyes straining at the screen. Something moved in the darkness, so faint it might have been a glitch. Yet it kept happening, followed by a barely audible scraping noise. Marcus felt fear erupt like ice water through his veins. He rewound the footage and cranked up the volume. The same scraping sound repeated, and then voices. Muffled, indistinct at first, but undeniably human. "Quick. They won't even notice," one of them said. Another responded, "Don't make it harder than it has to be. Just get it done. They'll never check." Marcus's pulse pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. A sense of horror washed over him. Someone is tampering with my daughter's remains. The next morning, armed with the partial recording, Marcus confronted the funeral director, an older white man whose lined face showed more annoyance than sympathy. "There are bruises on my daughter, and I noticed dirt under her nails," Marcus began, his voice shaky but determined. "What's your explanation?" The director eyed him coldly. "Bruising and discoloration can occur after death, Mr. Johnson," he said, his tone edged with condescension. "And residue under the fingernails is not unheard of." Marcus's jaw clenched. "That's not acceptable." The man gave a dismissive shrug. "I understand you're grieving. But if you have a complaint, file it." His indifference stoked Marcus's fury. By the time Marcus left, he was trembling with both anger and terror. That night, he showed Clara the footage, letting her hear the low voices through his speakers. Her eyes widened, and she pressed a hand to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Marcus, this is real. We have to do something." So they turned to the police. An officer, barely out of academy training, listened, then led them to the detective on call. Marcus showed him the footage, the audio, the bruises, everything. The detective slid the flash drive back across his desk with a weary sigh. "I'm sorry, but this doesn't conclusively prove tampering. It could be a glitch or audio from outside. I understand you're upset, Mr. Johnson, but there's no crime here." The detective's blank gaze told Marcus everything he needed to know. No one wanted to dig deeper for the truth. Racked with frustration and grief, Marcus left the station with Clara, feeling alone and helpless. Refusing to let the matter drop, Marcus combed through every second of footage again, analyzing shadows, isolating the audio. Over and over, he heard that calm yet cruel voice. "They'll never check." Everything in him rebelled at that arrogance. He pictured Lee's shining face, her excitement over drawing pictures of them in the backyard. She deserves better. She deserves justice. Marcus finally decided that if the police wouldn't hear him, he'd have to go public. With Clara by his side, he contacted local news stations and newspapers, sending them clips and summaries. One by one, they ignored him, except for Julia Reyes, a young journalist on a local cable channel. I believe something is off, she told him when they spoke. But if we're going to run this story, we need more to go on than a single piece of footage. Encouraged by any glimmer of support, Marcus arranged to meet Julia at a small cafe. She arrived with a notepad and a determined expression. We have to tie this into a broader pattern, she explained. Is there any history of complaints against the funeral home or the hospital or anything else that links them? Julia's relentless digging uncovered a wave of dubious practices at the funeral home. Unsanitary conditions, recycled caskets, missing records, and numerous complaints that had mysteriously disappeared. It was exactly the kind of trail that, if exposed, might force officials to pay attention. Meanwhile, Marcus and Clara tried to find a staff member who would talk. After countless dead ends, they finally connected with Kevin Foster, a former employee. At a small diner, Kevin sat across from them, fidgeting and glancing over his shoulder. You have no idea what kind of mess you're in, he muttered. I saw things. They cut costs any way they can, sometimes by messing with bodies. If there's an error or something suspicious, they just move the body, swap caskets, or cover it up. Most families never know. Marcus's stomach lurched. So you're saying my daughter's body might have been disturbed as part of these practices? Kevin nodded, lowering his gaze. They think black families won't ask questions. I'm sorry, man. Julia scribbled furiously in her notepad. Can we quote you on this? She asked. Kevin looked utterly terrified. I'll think about it, he said, before fleeing into the rainy night. Still, his words had unlocked a door Marcus was determined to keep open. When Julia's article finally went live, backed by Marcus's video, the questionable track record of the funeral home, and fragments of Kevin's testimony, a small storm ensued. Social media lit up with shock and anger. People began sharing their own horror stories of indifferent authorities, discriminatory practices, and unscrupulous funeral homes. But the pushback was fierce. Marcus's phone buzzed at all hours with strange calls and ominous messages. Drop it, you'll regret this. Leave it alone. One morning, he found spray-painted words scrawled across his garage door, "Stop digging." His heart pounded, recalling what had already been stolen from him. But he would not be bullied into silence. The heightened public pressure forced law enforcement to reopen Lee's case. Marcus found little comfort in their slow, reluctant efforts. Still, it was something, a crack in the wall. Julia continued to dig up new threads, uncovering a network of financial ties between the funeral homeowners and local hospital administrators, fueling rumors of a referral-for-profit scheme. The web of possible corruption stretched far beyond single suburban funeral home. Then, close to midnight 1 week later, Marcus's phone buzzed. Kevin's shaky voice came through. They found out I talked to you, he said, but I'm ready to testify. Just help me, please. Marcus's throat tightened. At last, they had someone who could blow this case open in a more official capacity, but also someone in danger. The next morning, the courthouse steps overflowed with people, protesters, media crews, and concerned locals waving signs that read, "Justice for Leah," and "In neglect now." Cameras clicked and whirred, capturing the tension in the air as Marcus and Clara arrived, flanked by their newly retained lawyer, Angela Reed. The funeral home's attorney, a man in an immaculate suit, stared Marcus down as they all filed into the courtroom. During opening statements, the defense painted Marcus as a grief-blinded father weaving conspiracies out of heartbreak. They dismissed the Coffin video as an illegal invasion of privacy, rife with potential glitches or doctored audio. Marcus felt his fury flare, but Angela's steady gaze reminded him to remain composed. Angela presented the evidence calmly but forcefully. Photographs of unexplained bruises on Lee's limbs, the unaccounted for dirt, the suspicious rush of the funeral process, and finally, the recording from inside the coffin. When the whispered voices echoed through the speakers, the room fell deadly silent. Even the judge's face tightened at the casual cruelty of the words. They'll never check. Kevin took the stand next. At first, his voice trembled so noticeably that it was hard to understand him. But as the defense tried to discredit him, his resolve strengthened. He spoke of reusing caskets, inadequate embalming procedures, and a systemic belief that certain families, like Marcus's, wouldn't raise a fuss. The funeral home's attorney tried to paint Kevin as a disgruntled ex-employee, but Kevin remained unflinching, describing every unlawful shortcut he had witnessed. When court adjourned, Marcus stepped outside, his sister's hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing," Clara assured him gently. Yet, the uncertainty of the jury's deliberations weighed on them all. 3 days later, the jury delivered its verdict, guilty of multiple charges involving negligence, fraud, and mishandling of remains. The judge imposed heavy fines and referred criminal charges against the director and specific staff members for further review. In the corridor, news reporters flocked around Marcus, microphones thrust forward. Tears glistened in his eyes as he explained that no verdict could bring Leah back, but it mattered that the world finally acknowledged what had happened. Leaving the courthouse, Marcus felt both relief and heartbreak. He recalled the last morning with Leah, her laughter echoing in his mind like a cherished melody. Nothing could erase his loss, yet he had managed to shine a light on systemic issues that might save other families from the same devastation. Days later, after the initial flurry of press and legal battles had calmed, Marcus returned to Lee's grave with yellow flowers, her favorite color. A soft breeze stirred the cemetery's oak trees as he knelt by her headstone, pressing the blossoms into the grass. He closed his eyes, recalling the sweet innocence of her last giggle. "I did it, baby," he whispered. "I made them see you." Behind him, Clara stood silently, allowing him the space to mourn, to breathe. When he finally stood, there was a new resolve in his gaze. "It can't stop here," he said to Clara. "We can't let them hurt more families." In memory of Leah, Marcus and Clara established the Leah Johnson Foundation, dedicated to fighting discrimination, enforcing stricter oversight of hospitals and funeral homes, and supporting grieving families who felt ignored or powerless. The outpouring of community support that followed was astonishing. People who had once been silenced now found the courage to speak, share, and push for changes in the law. Julia Reyes continued her investigative reporting, delving deeper into the funeral home's shady financial ties, uncovering more layers of corruption that extended into local governance. Under public pressure, several officials resigned or faced inquiries, and new regulations were passed to ensure transparency in funeral services. Although life never returned to normal for Marcus, there would always be an empty seat at the kitchen table, always a haunting stillness in Lee's bedroom. He found a path forward through his relentless devotion to her memory. A photo of them together, beaming under that old oak tree, now hung in the living room next to Lee's final drawing. The half-finished sketch bore the words, in her handwriting, "Always together, Dad." He kept the small hidden camera locked in a drawer, a silent testament to how a single desperate act could append years of corruption. Sometimes he took it out just to remember that moment when everything changed, the instant he realized no one else would fight for his daughter unless he did. Through it all, Marcus came to understand that true love isn't just about treasuring the laughter and warmth of those we care about. Sometimes, love demands we face fear head-on, shining a light into the deepest shadows where injustice thrives. Lee's spirit fueled his dedication, guiding him to stand up for the forgotten and the voiceless, ensuring her story echoed beyond her too short life. Thank you for witnessing this story. If it has resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel so that you never miss future stories. Share this video with your loved ones because it might resonate with them just as deeply. For more powerful and inspiring stories, watch the other videos on this channel.